first movies ever made. It came out in 1895, and it was called A Train Arrives in the Station. Audience members screamed, jumped, and even fainted when they saw it, because it looked so real to them that, unlike you, they expected it to actually run them over. This experience of shock and wonder was one that Georges Méliès worked for decades to create. In that time, he made over 500 movies, most of which were 1 to 5 minutes long. Méliès began as a shoemaker, working in the family business, but he cared much more about the tiny mechanisms in the machines than the shoes themselves. So instead, Méliès became a magician. He built an automaton with his knowledge of machines, and this automaton amazed audiences because it seemed to work like magic. Even today, we're amazed by automatons. Brian Selznick definitely was, because he wrote The Invention of Hugo Cabret about them. The Invention of Hugo Cabret, which was made into the movie Hugo, is about a preteen orphan boy in Paris in 1931. His father finds a broken automaton in the museum where he works and tries to fix it. When he dies in a fire, Hugo goes to live with his uncle, who's the timekeeper of the Montparnasse train station. His uncle is an alcoholic and eventually disappears. Hugo must keep the clocks running or he'll be sent to an orphanage, but he also has a personal mission to fix the automaton. He gets tied up with the train station toy shop owner and his goddaughter, and works to find out their story when he discovers the man's name, Georges Méliès, in a book about the first movies. Méliès was a pioneer of modern movies. He was among the first to realize that movies didn't have to reflect real life, so he literally made his dreams come true. Méliès used tricks he learned from being a magician to create a feeling of wonder and surrealism in his movies. He said, "The trick, intelligently applied, today allows us to make visible the supernatural, the imaginary, even the impossible." One of the tricks Méliès used was stop-and-start motion. He got the idea because his camera reel broke, as often happened in those days. The carriage they'd been filming had moved by the time the camera was fixed, so when they later developed the film, the carriage looked like it had magically disappeared. This led to the idea that other things, too, could magically appear or disappear with the stop and start of the camera. Méliès played a prime role in almost all of his movies, personally financing, directing, photographing, and starring in them. His most famous movie, A Trip to the Moon, came out in 1902. The famous image of a rocket flying into the eye of the moon was used repeatedly in Selznick's book. Méliès' method for making movies was as unique as the stories themselves. He built a sort of greenhouse so he could film in any weather while still taking advantage of the natural light. This was the first movie studio. Between 1896 and 1911, Méliès made over 500 movies with revolutionary special effects. In The Man with a Rubber Head, he made his head seem to inflate by standing on a wagon and moving it towards the camera. Soon after 1911, however, Méliès got in financial trouble thanks to World War I, because people no longer spent money on entertainment like the movies. He made his studio into a theater where he and his family performed until 1923 when it was torn down for a road. At that time, most of his 500 films were either thrown out or sold for scrap. For a few years, Méliès made some money, once again, as a magician. Then he worked as a toy shop owner at the Montparnasse train station, where he remained undercover until he was rediscovered by a film journalist in 1929. Once rediscovered, Méliès was honored and brought back into the film business. He was inducted into the French Legion of Honor just before he died in 1938. Brian Selznick's book, for the most part, accurately follows Méliès' story. The only and biggest addition was the invention of the orphan boy Hugo, the invention of Hugo Cabret.